Welcome, I'm Jon Caldara, your devil's advocate. I'm glad to spend some time with you. Check out my great little organization, the Independence Institute, at independenceinstitute.org. There's one guy in the entire nation that knows more about local, state, and national politics than anybody I've ever met. It's John Funn, the columnist from the Wall Street Journal. You see him on Fox News all the time. I honestly don't know how you are able to encapsulate every state-based news scoop. I mean, I know Colorado really well, but you know all the...
Well, but I have the best sources. And the reason I came to the Advocates Corner tonight is to learn more about what's happening in Colorado, and then I'll be fully informed.
I tell you what, before we jump into the states, let's have a little fun on the Fed level, because I want to go over our picks for president. This is the time of the season where they're all putting their toe in the water, jumping in. Some of them are finding the water is awfully shallow. I think Newt might find that as one of them, but you tell me. Right now, there are some favorites, and Mitt Romney is that favorite. Mitt Romney is the guy who's pulling in money. He looks so good. I mean, if you think president, you see his face.
Well, certainly Mitt Romney is the front runner, but it's a nominal front runner with a lot of flaws. Previous Republican nominating contests have featured much more obvious front runners. You know, the Republican Party loves to nominate the next guy or gal in line. Reagan's retiring. Let's nominate George H.W. Bush as vice president, who ran against him in '80. Got to run against Bill Clinton for re-election. Well, who ran against George H.W. Bush? Bob Dole. Let's nominate him. 2000, okay, there's no obvious guy. Let's nominate the son of the last president we had, George W. Bush. 2008, Bush is retiring. Well, who ran against Bush in 2000? McCain. Let's nominate McCain. Do you detect a pattern here?
It's the same thing in Colorado. We do the exact same thing. Why are Republicans more apt to do the next when it comes to our candidates?
It is bizarre because in whether it's baseball or business, Republicans say they like competition. They like a free and open exchange of ideas and, you know, let the best man idea company win. Not in presidential politics. There seems to be a hierarchy. You know, have you waited in line long enough? Well, luckily, I think Romney may be the front runner, but he's not nearly the front runner those previous people I mentioned were. And I think it's a completely open contest. This is the first relatively competitive Republican presidential contest we've had since, well, in my living memory. And by the way, to show you how ingrained this habit is in the Republican Party, 1948, Tom Dewey's the nominee. 2008, the last election, McCain was the nominee. Between those two elections, which is 3 generations of American politics, 60 years, the Republican Party in all but one presidential race, which was 64 Goldwater Miller, the Republican Party nominated in every single election, except that one, for president or vice president, a Nixon, a Bush, or a Dole. That is too much time in the same end of the gene pool. No, seriously, they kept recycling the same names over and over again. Nixon was nominated 5 times by the Republican Party.
Romney, I'm sorry. I don't see how this is going to work. Romney is going to run and he says, on day one, I am going to stop Obamacare. But back then, he gave us Obamacare in the state of Massachusetts, which Romneycare, which is falling apart, and many of our predictions are coming true about costs going up. It hasn't changed for a lot of people their coverage, and it's not working. It's falling apart. How in the world the single most pivotal issue for us has been Obamacare? How any presidential candidate will be the guy who gave us the first state-based Obamacare and win for president? I just don't see it happening. Well, is my calculation off?
I think Romney's political calculation would be this. First of all, in 7 months when the voters of Iowa and New Hampshire meet, you know, health care may have faded as an issue. So maybe we can run this out. Secondly, the big rap on me in 2008 was I kept changing my views, or I kept having a different persona. I shifted around too much. So I can't do that now because that'll play into the 2008 stereotype. And remember the title of his book that's just out, No Apology. Well, he's not going to make any apology for Romneycare.
Does everybody have to have a book now? I mean, do you have to have a book before you can become president? Is that part of the
new with modern
dynamic?
With modern media selling techniques, talk radio, cable television, Fox News, internet, almost any presidential book will sell a certain number of copies and make money for the author. So who wouldn't write a book? After all, everyone is full of brilliant ideas who's running for president. I mean, their spouse or themselves have said that to them. And so, of course, you write a book.
Put me down as the guy who says, I don't think Romney's going to be able to pull this one off. I know he's bringing in lots of money, and that's a big indication, but I just don't think the base is going to be able to forgive him for giving us Obamacare.
What's safe is there will be lots of surprises in this race. If you go back to May, June of 2007, which is the equivalent point in that campaign as we are in this one, who was the clear front runner for the Republican nomination? It was Rudy Giuliani, whose campaign was completely dead, blown out of the water, gone. John McCain ran out of money. Who was the clear favorite for the Democratic nomination? Hillary Clinton. Lots of surprises are in store for us.
Let's go down the list on some of these. There seems to be some of the reruns, some of the glory days from Republican victories in the past. Newt being one of those great ones. Newt's an amazing guy. You know him well. I've met with him a few times. He just is a stunningly smart guy. Right out of the box, taking on Senator Ryan's idea for budget. How much traction does Newt get, or is he too old school?
No, I think Newt can reinvent himself. I don't think you want to declare Newt over. I do think that he will enliven the debates, make them much more substantive and policy-oriented, but Newt has a basic problem. He is so smart he can't stay on message. You know, one of the things you have to do as a presidential candidate is you have to decide what your message is. You have to decide the 1, 2, or 3 things you want to do as president and you want to talk about, and you have to keep talking about them until you are bored to tears. And because not everyone is going to hear your message even if you think they have. And you basically have to bore yourself. Newt is so smart he can't bore himself. So he has to find new things to say all the time. And since he's so smart, he always has new things to say. The problem is at a certain percentage of time, they're real clunkers. Like, Paul Ryan's plan is social engineering, and I don't want to impose it, and it's a bad idea. Oops, I'm going to have to apologize to Paul Ryan. But I didn't really attack Paul Ryan. So if you didn't attack Paul Ryan, well, why are you apologizing to him?
Sarah Palin. Toe is in the water, toes out of the water. She has been remarkably cagey and very profitable at this. No one knows exactly what she's going to do.
Well, that's her job. Her job is pretending to run for president. She has just bought a house in Arizona. If you're going to run for president, you can't do it from Alaska. The travel is too much. Arizona is a good place to have a presidential headquarters. I think that she's launching a bus tour this coming week through the eastern states, both to sell books and to increase her visibility. She's sending lots of signals that she might run. But in the end, I believe firmly she will not run.
Why?
Three reasons. One is she's young enough to know that she has time. But the time will be perhaps put to best use not running for president, but changing her image, rehabilitating herself, improving some of the negative stereotypes that are circulating about her. She has time. She's in her late 40s. Secondly, she would give up an enormous amount of income. I mean, her Fox contract alone is over $1 million a year. She'd give up an enormous amount of income. She also has very young children. That will be less of a problem in future years. So remember, her marketing.
But very young children can't embarrass you. They don't have cocaine problems yet. They haven't cheated their way out of Harvard yet.
I think Sarah Palin wants to be a good mother, and Todd Palin wants to be a good father, and you can't really do that if you're running for president. At least not easily. So I believe her income and her visibility are dependent on people thinking she still might run. So for the next 2 or 3 months, you're going to see lots of signs that she's running, but ultimately she won't.
You and I were in Dallas just a few weeks ago, and we were at a wonderful dinner, and we were listening to the governor there, Rick Perry, give a nice speech about how great Texas is, and Texas has really been
75% of the private sector job growth in the country this last year came from Texas. They've gotten the model of low regulations, low taxes, pro-business politics
down. How many new House seats did they get after the census?
Four
new. So people are moving to Texas for jobs, for opportunity, for no income tax, and for a low regulatory state where they can actually do business.
Yes, and remember, this is a flat, hot place that basically wouldn't be populated unless there were air conditioning. So they're not primarily, although they're very nice parts of Texas, don't get me wrong, they're not primarily moving there for the weather.
Let me disagree with you. There are no nice parts of Texas.
You haven't been to the hill country around Austin where I can send you to the best barbecue.
I've been to Austin. There's some pretty girls in Austin. Well, let me tell you, it's not a great... Anyway, good music, too. All right, Rick Perry did a wonderful job touting how great it was, but he avoided a lot of the Washington talk. And there's an idea that maybe he's waiting for, as he says, the right candidate to appear, and he'll back that person. Is that just part of the caginess that any presidential candidate puts in right now?
I think Rick Perry wants to run for president, but ultimately he also is not, because he recognizes that not enough distance has passed between him and the last Texas governor to run for president, who left with a mixed record.
But a very different president, very different guy.
You know that, and I know that. The vast majority of Republican primary voters may not. They'll just simply say, been there, done that.
The guy that fascinates me perhaps the most, the un-Romney, if you will, is Chris Christie. I mean, Romney is tall, thin, athletic, good-looking, well-spoken, very polished, and then you've got this rather large guy who's
losing weight, though.
Well, despite that, I'll give him a break on that one. But he's New Jersey, and he's smart enough to be one of the guys who seems to say, this budget can't last. We have some serious things to face, and he's willing to hack off people.
And he's willing to say truthful things. He's willing to break the taboos of political correctness.
Like every other politician, you knew him before he was anybody. How long ago did you meet him?
A dozen years ago.
And he was a dog catcher or something? I forget.
No, he was a county freeloader. I'm sorry, they call them freeholders in New Jersey.
What is a freeholder? Is that like a county commissioner?
It's the equivalent of a county supervisor or county commissioner. Look, I'm a big fan of Chris Christie, but the remarkable thing is that nothing in his background would lead you to think he'd be a conservative hero, because he ran a very cautious campaign for governor. He was more of a Christie Whitman Republican growing up in New Jersey. The fact of the matter, though, is the budget crisis, the pension crisis, the debt crisis in New Jersey is so great that he has decided the only way that this can work, the only way we're going to get New Jersey out of the muck and mud that it's in, is to practice conservative politics and to tackle the unions, who are the single biggest power block in this country, and they have strangled state and local government. And that's why, when push comes to shove, it's either going to be the taxpayers or the unions, and it's going to be a cage match.
Who's going to win?
Well, in Wisconsin, the unions put up a good fight, but they did lose in the end.
I'm going to disagree with you. I don't think we've seen the end yet. Let's remember, there'll be
the law is the law.
The law is the law, but the law will go to the people in a referendum.
No, that's Ohio. Wisconsin has no referendum. The law is the law in Wisconsin.
I thought
because in Ohio they passed collective bargaining reform, and then it's going to a referendum this November.
It was my understanding that Scott Walker didn't put it into the appropriations bill, and the appropriations bill cannot be sent to the people, but other bills can. Boy, if I could get one on you, I would feel really, really smart.
It's not going to the ballot. That's why they're fighting it in courts.
All right. Let's take a look at Scott Walker. He's a conservative hero now. Some people say, let him do it. I mean, right now there's such an anti-spending revolt going on. Anybody who's a politician with the guts to take on public sector unions, Chris Christie or Walker, becomes a darling overnight.
Yes, but remember, there are also a lot of people who want a president who can either convince them they can handle foreign policy or has foreign policy experience. Look, there are three stools of the Republican coalition. There's the economic conservatives, the social conservatives, and the national security conservatives to some extent. You need a presidential candidate who is acceptable, although may not be favored by each one of those legs of the stool. All of the candidates have problems, but ultimately I believe the eventual Republican nominee is going to be someone who convinces all three of those constituencies that they will care about their issue, they will consult with them, and they won't violate basic principles when it comes to each of those three issue areas.
Tim Pawlenty.
Well, he's the one who's explicitly making that argument. He is saying, I may not be anyone's favorite. I'm not the most exciting guy. I'm not the most charismatic guy. But I governed in Minnesota, which was a terribly blue state. I mean, Minnesota has voted Democratic for president the last 9 elections in a row. You know, Hubert Humphrey, Gene McCarthy, Al Franken, all came out of Minnesota. Walter Mondale. So he's saying, I governed as an economic conservative. I'm from a blue-collar background. I have basic conservative social values, and I govern that way. And I'm getting up to speed on national security real fast, and I can be the candidate who can cover all those bases. And I may not be your favorite candidate, but I'm the one who can unite the coalition that elected Ronald Reagan.
I've known you for a long time. That's the closest thing to an endorsement I think I've heard you say in a long time.
No, I'm simply saying, you asked me about Pawlenty. I said that's Pawlenty's argument.
You've given me good reasons why the other guys aren't going to be able to do it.
I can also give you the problems that Pawlenty has,
right,
which is he did govern partly as an opportunist. He endorsed climate change. He now says that's a clunker. He's done the reverse Romney. Romney won't apologize for Omnicare. Pawlenty falls over himself saying, look, I screwed up, I messed up, I'll never do that again.
Love it. I love that.
He increased the ethanol mandate in Minnesota. You know, a lot of ethanol, shall we say, advocates in Minnesota.
ADM.
Yes. And now he's gone to Iowa, to his credit, and said, well, forget all the things that I said about ethanol. We have to phase out federal subsidies to ethanol, and Iowa is probably the #1 state in the country for ethanol subsidies. So I think Pawlenty has serious weaknesses when it comes to conservative principles, but he has anticipated them and he has addressed them. And look, he's still not well known. He's at 6% in the latest Gallup poll versus Romney, who's at 20, Palin at 15, Ron Paul at 10. But these small states, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada, they can provide a launching pad for a relatively unknown candidate. I'll give you Bill Clinton, who rocketed to stardom out of those small states. I give you Mike Huckabee, who rocketed to stardom from those small states. I give you John Kerry, who no one gave much of a chance to early on in 2004. So it doesn't matter what the Gallup poll says now nationwide. It's what happens in those 3 or 4 small states that are going to be a real determinant of who's the nominee.
Ron Paul, the cult following that he has among many of us libertarian-leaning folks puts this guy on a pedestal. He didn't get a whole lot of respect last time around. What's going to be different this time? Why?
Well, Ron Paul is not running to be president of the United States. I mean, he's realistic. What he is running is to gather together a new movement that can pressure the Republican Party from within and fight what he considers, compromisers, neoconservatives, people who want to intervene everywhere around the world. But, Ron Paul is eccentric, but, he's eccentric in the fact that he actually thinks the Constitution means what it says and says what it means. And in 2008, he warned about this coming financial collapse. He said the business cycle had been pumped up with lots of malinvestment, the housing bubble, all of those other things, and he was right. And it collapsed, and it almost took down the economy. So Ron Paul gets points for prescience.
Why isn't he a possibility? Why won't he be taken seriously?
Because he's too dogmatic. I mean, look, Ron Paul in Congress voted against authorizing a congressional medal for both Mother Teresa and Ronald Reagan. It's hard to explain that kind of consistency. I mean, I can understand it because, look, he doesn't want to spend money on anything. But you have to understand, when you're that pure, you're going to turn off a certain segment of the voters who simply say, what's that all about?
All right, who are we missing here?
Oh, I think, well, let's see, we've covered Newt, we've covered Ron Paul, we've covered Romney. There's John Huntsman, former governor of Utah, who is a rising establishment choice for the Republican nomination now that Mitch Daniels is not running. John Huntsman was ambassador to China under Barack Obama. That's going to be a rap against him. But he will say, look, I have foreign policy experience with the leading trading partner that we have and the leading foreign policy competitor that we have, China. And he's more of a moderate Republican, but believe me, he will get some businessmen and women to support him. There's also Rick Santorum, who's a Catholic, who's appealing to the evangelical vote and to ethnic Catholics. There's Michelle Bachmann, who, since Sarah Palin is likely not to run, I think will pick up a lot of the Palin spark and charisma
Will
section.
she run?
Michelle Bachmann, I believe she will run, and she'll announce next month.
What about Gary Johnson, formerly was it New Mexico?
Former governor of New Mexico. Great record in New Mexico, more vetoes than any governor in the nation. The problem is Ron Paul is also running. Ron Paul has a big head start in name recognition. And I think Gary Johnson is leading with issues like marijuana decriminalization and other things, which are fascinating issues to discuss, but they're not primarily the interest of the voting public.
Who's going to be the first out? Who's going to jump out of the pool and go, I'm out of money, I'm gone. I got to go get a real job.
You don't understand. This is their job. See, presidential politics has changed. It used to be that it was a real sacrifice to run for president. Now, I mean,
you run for president, you get a Fox show.
Well, not just that, but you get a campaign committee. People donate money to the campaign committee. It pays for all your travel, pays for you to run around doing speeches, pays for you to be in debates. where you get to have a national stage. You might get lucky. You might climb in the polls. This is, look, compared to what most people do in their life, if you're an ambitious, egotistical politician, this is not a bad deal. And look, you know, you used to be, you crashed and burned a presidential race and you were never heard from again, you know, George Romney, Mitt Romney's father. Now you crash and burn, and look at Bill Richardson. He almost became Commerce Secretary until those scandals in New Mexico took him out. I mean, the bottom line is, in a world of cable television where name identification is everything, running for president is your best bet to keep yourself relevant, and if you're Mike Huckabee, to get a Fox show, or if you're Herman Cain, to get a radio show.
Or if you're...
And Herman Cain, by the way,
we didn't talk about
15,000 people showed up for his presidential announcement in Atlanta.
But they were expecting free pizza.
He doesn't do that anymore. He doesn't run Godfather's Pizza. Herman is obviously not going to be the presidential nominee, but he is going to really liven up those debates. He is, let's put it this way, he's what everyone hoped Alan Keyes would be. He is
but sane?
Very sane, very serious, and he has the best basso profundo preacher's voice I've ever heard.
All right, we've got about 5-6 minutes left here. We're talking about the Republican side that we know so well. There's going to be some problems on the Obama side. Fundraising is not nearly as good as what Obama hoped at this point. What happens? We're still looking at a $1 billion campaign.
Look, he will raise whatever he needs. I mean, the money will be there. But he is chesting that proposition. I think his stand on the 1967 borders, that Israel will have to retreat to those borders as part of a negotiation, that may cost him with some Jewish donors. And Jewish donors are very significant in the Democratic Party. But Obama's real problem is unemployment. No president, since modern polling was invented in the 1930s, no president has won re-election if unemployment is 7.3% or above. The only president who pulled it off when it was 7.3% was a man named Ronald Reagan. And A, he was Ronald Reagan, and B, unemployment was clearly heading down significantly and very fast, and economic growth was clearly increasing very fast. Obama is sitting at 9% unemployment. If there's anyone in the audience who wants to make a bet with me that in a year from now, when these basic perceptions of the economy which influence the presidential voters set into concrete, because they happen a few months before the actual vote, if anyone in the audience wants to bet me that unemployment is going to be below 7.3% in a year from now, you can email me, write to me, and I'll make a bet with you, and I'll take you to the cleaners.
Let me put this on the line here. Let's see if I'm understanding what you're saying, Mr. Fund. Is he a goner president?
No, of course not. History is a guide to the future. It's not determinate. I'm going to say Obama is in much more trouble than it might be apparent because unemployment is at 9% and likely to be stubbornly at 8 or above when people's perceptions about the economy and their current condition are set in stone.
One of the great truths of politics is whatever the conventional wisdom is, it is wrong. In that it seems like it flips over very quickly. George Bush, the elder, guy had 92% approval rating.
Artificial steroids because of the war in Iraq.
Exactly, but nobody was going to touch him, which is why we had, I think, a string of weaker Democratic candidates, including Bill Clinton, who I think was trying to make a first run.
But here's one of the things you learn. A lot of these weak candidates that nobody's heard about, they will have been on the road for 18 months or a year by the time they get the nomination. That process usually develops if you're a winning candidate, you get the nomination. That means you probably have gotten a lot better on the stump. You've been an effective fundraiser. You've learned how to manage the media. You've learned how to avoid basic mistakes. Bill Clinton he was always a pretty good candidate in Arkansas, but he became a very effective, smooth national candidate through that process. So too did George W. Bush, who was awful being started out, even though he'd been elected in Texas. A presidential campaign will present a nominee on both sides, because Barack Obama's a real pro too, that will be very competent, very capable, and fully able to be elected president. I believe competition does bring you at least a good candidate.
How weak will Obama be? I mean, I understand unemployment will still be very high, but this guy's an incumbency. It takes
incumbents are difficult to take out of
somebody
office.
as great as Jimmy Carter to lose the incumbency, and I think a lot of Republicans feel like this is going to be a slam dunk. I'm not nearly as convinced.
No, it's not a slam dunk. Obama leads a generic Republican by about 44 to 38%. He has about a 6-point lead over, Brand X Republican. But it's at 44%, which is effectively his re-elect number. You need 50% barring a major third-party candidate to get reelected. So I think Obama's on the bubble. I think he can be reelected. It's going to be a very competitive, close race. But Obama's numbers are below 50%. You need 50% to win. And the advantage of being an incumbent is everybody knows your name. And you have enormous advantages in that. The bad news is you're stuck with your record. And if this election is a referendum on Barack Obama's policies, which have not produced the results he said they would, he's in real trouble. If it's a referendum on the Republican challenger, who is viewed as marginal or extremist or gaffe-prone, then he has a very good chance of winning.
We're now seeing who Obama is. Before he was like an ink blot. Whatever you wanted to see, you saw in Obama. It was hope and change and a new type of politic. Now we find out that he's just a politician like every other politician.
No, he's a Chicago politician.
A very good
and he has an enemies list.
So the people who voted for him, who were engaged by just the idealism of it, how many of those are turned off? Does this make it? Is this enough to change it?
I won't say turned off, less than enthusiastic. Remember, the easiest thing for someone to do in politics is to not vote. There are a lot of new voters who voted for Barack Obama, hope and change. They may not vote for the Republican candidate, especially if they're younger, and they might be turned off by the Republican Party's social views, but they can stay home. That's a loss for Obama.
People want to keep up on your work. OpinionJournal.com is where I go to find it. Where else
It's
can we
actually
find it?
WSJ.com. You click on the opinion section, and almost every day there's some thing that I have there that's free. I do other stuff for Political Diary, which is a paid newsletter, and you can also follow me on Fox News and various other cable outlets.
WSJ.com. Jon, always a kick. Thank you for joining me. Tell a friend. We'll see you next week.